We need to have a lot of people out there sort of innovating and saying, here's a different way we might be able to do that could work. Because just doing the same things the same way clearly is not hitting the mark.
Hey everyone, my name is Kyle Wallgren, and yes, this is another episode of the Business of Education podcast where we have an incredible guest by the name of Michelle Rhee, who is a venture partner at EO Ventures, but is also the former chancellor of Washington, D.C. Public Schools. Michelle started her career as a teacher in Baltimore, go Ravens, and went on to create the New Teacher Project, helping bring great teachers into the classroom nationwide. As a chancellor, she transformed DC public schools, making it one of the fastest improving districts in the country. Michelle, how are you?
I'm great, Kyle. Thanks for having me on board today.
So it is football season, so go Ravens, but I am a Bills fan at heart, so that's all I'm going to say. But Baltimore has done an amazing job this year. Back to school though, what got you? Did you want to be a teacher first? What got you into teaching? And then what took you out of teaching?
Um, I never thought, I'd say early on, that I wanted to be a teacher. It was not sort of on my radar. But I've always loved kids, like ever since I was young. And then when I was in college, I saw a poster for Teach for America, and it was like this
Okay.
grainy black and white poster, and it was this picture of a Teach for America Corps member with a kid, and it said, "How can I afford not to make this work?" And I think it like tugged on all my heartstrings about like making a difference in the world and making it a better place. So I joined Teach for America, got into education that way, and that's what started my career.
And then how long did you spend as a teacher before you had the opportunity to become chancellor?
um,
That seems like a big journey.
there's a lot in between. So I spent 3 years in the classroom in Baltimore, to your point, at Harlem Park Elementary School. And then went to get my master's degree at the Kennedy School at Harvard. I got a public policy master's, but a concentration in education policy. And then after that, founded the New Teacher Project,
Hmm.
ran that for 10 years, and then went from that position into the chancellor position in DC. So had, a sort of a not a very non-traditional route into the superintendency.
No, that it sounds like an amazing journey though. The idea of building the new teacher project, you know, what do you think would be different about when you started it then compared to today's environment? I'm sure getting teachers into the classroom is dramatically different.
Yeah.
Um,
In some ways it's different now, and in some ways it's not. Like, so when I started the New Teacher Project in 1997, the big thing back then was there was just a teacher shortage, right? So every urban public school district across the country was struggling to fill their vacancies. There was the statistic like we're going to need 2 million teachers over the next 10 years, and people thought it was like a crisis, like what are we going to do? And that's why programs like Teach for America were working so well, because there was this real need for teachers at the time. um, you know I very naively, I think maybe along with other people in the country, thought, okay, this is a recruitment problem, right? If only districts would recruit more effectively, then we can solve
mhm.
this issue. So that was our original thesis. Like, we just have to go in, we have to work with school districts and state departments of education, and we have to put in place like really strategic and high quality recruitment plans with great materials, that sort of thing. We did that, and what we found was that like the recruitment wasn't really the problem, right? There were tons of people, both traditional candidates who had come through schools of education and were certified through that route, and non-traditional candidates who wanted to teach in urban public school districts across the country. So it wasn't a recruitment problem so much, or the recruitment problem could be solved relatively quickly and efficiently. The challenge was they couldn't get hired because of a whole bunch of bureaucracy, different kinds of rules that exist around hiring, et cetera. And so, my journey with the new teacher project was marked by, like, I had a theory about what the problem was, and we went to go solve it, and it turned out like that's not really the problem. It's the selection, it's the placement, it's that sort of thing. And one of the things I think is interesting about the new teacher project as a nonprofit organization is, like, we kept evolving, like, as we were solving problems and figuring out, wait a second, that's not quite it, that's not quite it. The organization kept evolving, and even to this day, Tequila Brownie, who's the CEO now, I think has that same mentality and attitude of not believing like, oh, we have the answer and we're going to stick to this answer, like, regardless, but always being really thoughtful about, like, are we hitting the mark on this? And I think that's one of the things in education is, like, everybody's looking for, like, the answer, and very rarely is the answer, like, super clear.
So it sounds like a startup. You're trying to figure out an answer and you never really get there. So you're just like, oh, this sounds good today.
Yeah.
And it helps for now. And then you find out what the deeper question is, and it continues on. I noticed, today you mentioned the hiring process. I'm going to use the word was rigid, but today, I guess last week I saw an article on, I believe it was New Jersey, removing some of the testing requirements for new teachers coming in to maybe get access to teachers a little bit easier. And we have former teachers that work at my startup company at Soma. So we had a conversation around that. And ultimately, they just said they wanted to shorten the process, not lower the standard by doing that. Do you think that they're headed the right direction by making it easier, maybe eliminating some of these tests? What's your opinion there?
Honestly, for where we are now, we have to be open and willing to try different things. If there is a way to make sure that the quality of people that we bring into the classroom remains high, but we can still do that by tweaking certain things, then I think we got to be open to that. We got to measure it on the back end to make sure that we're doing a good job. But I was just talking yesterday to a woman who started a program called Teach Start that is looking at basically how do you bring teachers in non-traditional routes, right? But without them having to take a lot of time off um, to go back to school, right? How do you do it efficiently and effectively? She's got a theory about how to do it, and I said to her, like, this is the thinking that we need, right? We need to have a lot of people out there sort of innovating and saying, here's a different way we might be able to do that could work. Because just doing the same things the same way clearly is not hitting the mark. So the more openness that we have to new ideas, I think we're going to benefit from that. Again, as long as we're, like, measuring things on the back end to make sure that we understand, like, which of these new ideas is effective and is bringing in more high quality folks, and which are not.
Do you see there being a change? Obviously, I'm in the education space. I never thought I was going to be in the education space ever, ever. I want to be very clear on that. And if you asked every person I went to school with, they would be amazed that this is where I landed. But we use AI to help kids with fluency at the company that I founded. Do you see a bigger role taking place in the classroom to maybe not need as many teachers, but give them the ability to do more with having to focus on certain things within that classroom? Do you see that changing at all?
Um, so what's interesting is that I recently came into the venture capital space, right?
Mm-hmm.
And before that, I'd say I had turned into a bit of a curmudgeon as it pertained to education, right? And what is possible, because I'd spent, like, the vast majority of my career there. Then I got out of education, And when Roland Fryer, who's one of the founders of EO Ventures, called me and said, "Hey, we've got this $100 million fund that we just raised. We're interested in having you come in and basically manage a fund within the fund to focus on education investments." I was like, "No, thanks." I was like, "I'm out of education. I love being out of education. I have no desire to get back in." Uh, uh, but then I was like, "Oh, maybe I could do some other things." She's like, "Sure, come on board, do whatever you want." And then, my first week on the job, they had me sit in on a board meeting for one of their education portfolio companies. And I
Mm-hmm.
came out of the meeting, I was like, he should do this. I should introduce him to these people. And I was like, I guess I have to do education. And Roland was like, yeah. So I've been doing this for the last 6 months, and it has turned me from curmudgeon into like I am super bullish right now. And it's because I am seeing these founders every day who have these ideas, mostly around technology, that they believe can help teachers, make their jobs better, easier, take out some of the super frustrating, time-consuming pieces of what they're doing. Right? I'm just seeing a lot of exciting things, and so it's made me much more enthusiastic and feeling like yes, we can do this. There is potential, and as it pertains to teachers, to your question, like we are at an incredibly important time in our country in that teachers are feeling incredibly overburdened because they
Mm-hmm.
are. There are more opportunities for people to leave education and leave the classroom, and lots of people are choosing that. So we really have to figure out like how like what can we do to support and encourage teachers to structure those jobs in a way that they feel like, okay, this makes sense. I love doing this, right? And if there can be technological advances or resources that help to do that, like I think 100% we should be doing that. But I would also say that like, teachers have to be a part of this process, right, of
Mm-hmm.
developing these new technologies. And instead of people like sort of out here developing solutions and trying to figure out like, hey, does this fit a problem? Like, how do we engage teachers in understanding what are the things that are super time consuming, that are burdensome, that maybe you don't need to do, and AI or technology somehow how can help with, and develop those in a smart way that's really aligned with what teachers feel like they need. If we could do that, I feel like we're going to have wins all the way around.
No, I agree with you 100%. The like I said, I would have never guessed to be in education. Me and my wife actually believed that like kids went to school and they're supposed to be taught at school, and when they come home they shouldn't have homework, and they should be able to go do their home life. And that was my mindset, and that was my wife's mindset around education. And uh, then when COVID hit, I two of my kids from my first marriage lived in Canada, and I wasn't able to
Mm.
see them. And we went 18 months without being able to be in person because of the border restrictions. And one day my daughter asked me to teach her how to read. And she had no requests in these 18 months from me. We're going through a chaotic world. And there was like, she was okay that we hadn't seen each other. And she's 6 at this time. And that just like broke my entire soul. Like the first question you asked me, hey, dad, can you help me with this in this chaos? I couldn't, because I was a non-reader, right? And um, I guess the passion of being a father first drove me into like trying to figure out a solution to them into that. And that just opened up this whole can of worms where all of a sudden I'm like, no, wait a minute. Parents have to play a role in this. Teachers only have so much time and they're asked to do so many things. And, we constantly are, although we want to make their life easier, we're always putting something in front of them that's noisy. And, especially like New York City is one of our biggest customers, but you go into their reading app category in New York City and there's 100 things to choose from, and we want them all to learn our thing, and they're limited to time, right? So it changed my perspective coming into the ed tech type space. But another thing that you said was teachers are leaving the classroom. And so, ed tech, as much as it can bring value to the class, it's almost like a hindrance, because first people we go for are teachers. We want to have those teachers come in and help us understand our product better and how we can be a part of the solution. But we're taking great teachers that love teaching out of the classroom to build technologies. So it's like this double-edged sword. We're helping, but we're hurting at the same time.
One question I have is like, are there structures that we could set up that would allow teachers, principals, and other educators to help with product development without leaving the classroom, right? So if there were opportunities for educators, one, just to learn more about the venture and startup space generally, but ed tech founders are developing their products, like that teacher feedback is so important,
So
right?
important.
Maybe we could set up structures in which educators would have the opportunity to weigh in on those things, right? I think if we could do that without taking them out of the classroom, but give them those opportunities, I think we could, one, make better products, right? But two, for teachers who are in the day to day of like grading the papers and writing the lesson plans and knocking it out, to have some level of opportunity to weigh in on things like that, to interact with people who are like, oh my gosh, your insights are like gold to us, right? And feel valued in that process. And then on the back end, be able to see that they've helped to develop some products that they would use, right? They would want, and they see their input and insights like reflected in those. I think that could be a really nice thing. So I've been talking to some folks about like, is there some way that we could set those dynamics up? Um, so that we're not necessarily pulling people out of the classroom, but we're still leveraging their knowledge and expertise. I think that'd be kind of cool to do.
That's super interesting. Now the squirrels are turning, so thank you. I won't sleep again tonight. um,
And your
when
wife,
moving
dang it,
from,
Michelle Rhee, what are you doing?
yeah, it's horrible as it is. I do some consulting on the side, and I was meeting with the gentleman yesterday, and he's pitching me this product that he wanted me to help him build. And he says something, and I just get locked in on one thing that he mentioned, and he goes through the rest of his product, and the thing that he mentioned wasn't a part of the product at all. And so I take what he gives me, and I go home after that, and I can't get off the one piece that he mentioned that wasn't a part of his product. So he calls me this morning. He's like, what do you think? I'm like, you're building the wrong product. What you have is a great idea, but that's not the business. The business is this one thing that you do on the side, and that's what's scalable and exciting, and people will talk about it, and you can generate buzz around it. And my mind works overtime, so I couldn't go to bed. So I ran the business model and financial aspect of it for him last night. And I'm like, look, it's going to cost you this amount of money to build this, or you're going to build this for about an eighth of the cost. And these are your actual revenue opportunities. And by the end of it, he's like, so are you my partner, or am I hiring you to do this? I'm like, well, let me think on that. But yeah,
That's such an amazing opportunity, right? And that's really the role that we like to play at EO Ventures with our founders. Obviously, the capital is a big piece to it, but we don't like to just write checks and then get the quarterly updates. Like, we want to be
right.
in it with our founders and understand like what it is, what is your idea, how do you build this into something that is going to be attractive to the clients, even so if it's even early on, just somebody who has an idea, right? And we help to incubate that idea, or at the beginning stages, if it's a later stage or somebody who's more established, we still want to be in it with them, because for our partners, like, that's where we derive a lot of our joy, is like problem solving with our founders.
And I think what you said there, and the majority of our listeners are ed tech entrepreneurs. So what you said there, I think it's overlooked so much. There's a lot of times, and early on when we were raising money for Ed Soma, my mindset was like, I just want your money. I don't want your opinion. I was scared, like, what if they don't like me afterwards? And, I get ousted from my own company. And that was my thought process for a while on that. And then after, going through raising a little bit of money, I'm like, the money was easy. The insight that some of these other companies offered was really what was so much harder
Yeah.
about building a company. And you overlook that so much, I think, as a founder, and especially in EdTech, the knowledge behind how schools operate, how they bill, when they're going to release their budgets, how are they going to analyze ROI for bringing in a new product is so valuable that a lot of people overlook. And I think that our founder community needs to really understand, when you do have that opportunity to bring in somebody that wants to be hands-on, it's not a bad thing. It's actually going to be really helpful, especially in the EdTech space.
Yeah. You got to find the right fit though, right? You have to find people who you vibe with, you share sort of common goals, your values are similar, et cetera. I was just talking to a founder the other day who said, I thought this was brilliant. He's like, I have a lot of people who are interested in investing in my company, and so I'm in a fortunate position where I can be choosy on the money that I take. And so he's like, so I want my investors to be part of like the founding team, to be part of the
Mm-hmm.
team. And I thought that was a helpful insight. But on the investor side, like we have to do our part too. And one of the things that
Right.
was so compelling to me about EO when I was first talking to Roland about it was, as I was asking him, like, what's the relationship that you have with your founders? And he said, um, we want to be the first call that founders make when something good happens, and we want to be the first call that they make when something bad happens.
Well,
And he was telling me the story about this founder of one of their portfolio companies early on that was having trouble, and he like had 90 days of runway left, right? And so Roland just made a point of like checking in with him like every morning. Hey, we got 54 days left, uh, and 2 days before everything was about to fall apart, they sold a contract, and everything sort of looked up from there. And the founder came back to Roland, was like, a lot of other people just went dark on me once they saw that it looked like they were going to have to write me off, right? Then they literally wrote me off. He's like, you were the only one that like stuck with me to the end. And so um I think we've got to do our part on the investor side also, of saying like, we gotta really be there with our founders, not just in the good times but in the tough ones too.
no, and that that strikes a really good point, because I'm fortunate enough that I've had success with some of my other businesses. So when we've gotten close to running out of money with EdSoma, I've got one investor that I can count on consistently, I guess. But it's harder to go through that dark period by yourself. And
Yeah.
so many investors are like, "Oh, great, I'm going to lose my money," and they just kind of leave you to hang. You know what I mean? And that dark time where you're like, okay, I need to focus on raising money, but you don't usually that means that you're taking your attention away from other critical areas in the business, whether it's sales or scaling or quality assurance, whatever that is. And you really have to focus on revenue or capital of some sort. And you have to decide, like, am I going to focus on capital from raising money, or am I going to focus on capital from a sales standpoint? And the crappy thing about education is the sales cycles are so long.
So
So when you're in the middle of something and you don't see a path, a short-term path, it's hard to choose sometimes. But those investors that do call you and follow up, they mean more than probably most founders like to admit, or even thank them for. But it is so helpful to have somebody you can count on, even if it's just to be like, today sucks, and not have them judge. You know what I mean?
yeah, it's so interesting. I had a founder pitch me on a product, which I actually thought like there's lots of good things here, but it wasn't quite. There were some things that we had sort of noticed like we weren't sure about. And so I said, we're going to take a pass for this round. I said, I'm happy to, give feedback if you want. She's like, actually, yes, I'm going to take you up on that. And so we got on a call, kind of walked her through it. And she's like, I don't understand. And then after the first 10 minutes, she's like, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. She's like, I'm frustrated. She's like, because I've bootstrapped this to date, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
this is what I've built with literally no investment so far. And she's like, and I'm talking to all these investors, and it seems like what they want makes sense, but like I need an investment to do it, right? And she just says, I feel like people have unrealistic expectations. And so I literally talked through that with her, and I was like, yeah, I can see why you're frustrated, right? And so I sort of was giving my point of view. And afterwards, she was like, even though it was a no, she's like, oh my gosh, thank you. Because this is a conversation and this is feedback that like honestly I haven't gotten from anyone else. So I've gotten lots of other no's, but not a lot of other like insights and feedback that can help me, that because and I started the call saying, I'm going to give you feedback, but I don't want this to discourage you, right?
Right.
Because there's so many circumstances in which like the investors are wrong and the founders are right, and when you keep going, like you prove it out. So I do not want to discourage you in this. And so I think the being a founder is incredibly hard. I did it. And it was one of the hardest things I ever did with my co-founder. And luckily, she was a serial co-founder, so she'd been through this enough. And but it's hard stuff, and not having an investment community that is there with you, or when you do have that, like just the difference that it makes is huge.
It's so huge. You brought up another thing that I think a lot of people need to understand is hitting certain milestones or KPIs to be able to raise capital. And early on, I think we all got, and maybe founders have still thought to this idea as like, oh, I had an idea and I went and raised some money, and now I own Facebook, and it's all happy joy, right? And that's, I was naive to think that way. I never raised money in any of the businesses I had built before. I'd always bootstrapped them and built them the old fashioned way. But when you're trying to scale something a lot larger, cash flow and sales cycles play a big role in that. But I overlooked the importance of validation. And looking back, I think customer validation and revenues have a lot of similarities in bringing value or proving out value to an investor. That's my opinion. What do you think, a young founder or startup should do, the direction that they should go to lower the barrier to a potential institutional style investor, right? It's different than getting your mom to write a check, but somebody that does this for a living, that has to find all the flaws, what's something that they can come with from data, or is it revenue, or is it validation, where you're like, okay, this has a real chance?
That's interesting because, there's no formula to this, right? If there was, then I think it'd make founders' lives a whole lot easier. Like, oh, if I just meet these certain things, then all the checks are going to start flowing. Um, and for whatever reason, that is not the case. I would say a few things. One is like we always like to see founders with a ton of conviction, right? Good founder market fit. Like it makes sense that you are the person who is going to develop an extraordinary solution to this problem because of the experiences that you've had, and sort of expertise that you bring to this. So that founder market fit, that conviction, and then just somebody who, like, yes, if you can see sales and traction, obviously those things matter a lot, but I think equal to that is the ability to assess what's going on, right? And explain, like, hey, I set this target. I didn't meet it, but I know exactly why and what I'm going to do to fix it. Right. I'd say that the ability to assess situations and figure out like what step are you going to take from there is equally important.
No, I appreciate that. So one of the things, and I think that this is a question that a lot of founders who are in depth with conversations with funds, I hear a lot of the same thing, like, hey, they gave us these KPIs, then they moved the goalpost.
Mm.
And we reached those KPIs. And then the next meeting we went in, they moved the goalpost. And then they gave us a new set. And you repeat that cycle, and next thing you find out, you're a year later and they're still asking you to do something, but you've already met the first requests. Is there any advice you can give on maybe looking past what that first initial request is to understand what the long term play is that you guys are actually looking at? Um,
Yeah.
to
I think that's super valid. I'll give an example of uh, a dynamic that we had between the firm and one of our founders, um, which was that, you know, he had a lot of investors. People are, obviously a lot of pressure to meet certain sales metrics, et cetera. But he has an extraordinarily close relationship with Roland, who is our GP. And at some point, he was like, "Look, uh, my revenue growth is going to look different than what we had all originally set out, but this is why, because I am moving more from a services model into like this platform that I'm building, right? And so
Mhm.
there's going to be this transition period where like the numbers might not look great, but like long term, this is what it's going to mean for the company, right?" And Roland was like, "Yes, makes sense." So,
Makes
you know,
sense.
so I think that having the kind of relationship and to our, what we were talking about previously, like finding the investors that you have a certain level of trust in, you have a good relationship with, that you can have those conversations with them, and that when you do, right, they're going to be like really reasonable on the back end, and they're going to be with you through that. I think that's why just accepting the checks is not the right thing. Is like you got to get the you got to get the right fit between founder and investor.
No, I agree with you so much. You mentioned something though, but having a relationship with the person, and I can't stress this enough. Building rapport and relationships prior to raising money or asking to raise money, I feel like is very important. From a young founder that really getting into that space, what's a creative way to start building a relationship with a complete stranger in a space that they're wanting to understand more without seeming needy or intentional, like they're just trying to get to the goal line to get your checkbook?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I'm relatively new at this, so the way that I operate might be like different from other folks. But I always appreciate when people are just hungry, right? People will hit me up on LinkedIn or just send cold emails to me and be like, "All right, I have a question, I have a thought. Can I grab a few minutes with you?" And I'm super open to doing that. And I always think when I was part of Build Within, one of the things that we did that I thought made sense is we were always talking to investors and having intro conversations when we weren't raising money.
Hmm.
I always think that's a good strategy. Like your back is not up against the wall, right? And neither is theirs. And you're just, with less pressure, have the opportunity to build a relationship with those folks. And then the other thing is, I think, honesty of like just being very straightforward. For me, that works, right? Somebody to say, like, here's where I am, here's what I know, here's what I don't know, right?
Right.
Um, I always find that like really refreshing and makes me more I think, open to like forming that relationship when you're establishing good trust from the get go.
No, that makes a lot of sense. You just mentioned here's what I don't know. How important is it, do you think, for a young founder to understand what they don't know?
Again, I only speak for myself in this, and maybe a little bit of ego, but I think it's super important. Again, in the relationship and trust building, we've all been through the thing where you're faking it until you make it, and you're selling off of Figma, that sort of thing, right? Everybody's done that, and that's part of the game. But I do think that with folks like your investors, you want people who you can share the words and all. Like, we don't know the answer to this. Here's what we're doing to try to figure it out. Do you have thoughts? Right? For us, we love that because we are making investments based on finding founders that like we believe in, and so once you do that, you know that the person is going to be able to figure it out, right? So we don't need you to come and give us a dog and pony show and act like you got everything, locked down. um, being honest about, hey, this is what I don't know, or this is what I'm not good at. How can I, how can I bring somebody on, or advisors or whatever to supplement that? Um, I think from the investor side to hear that from founders is actually a very positive thing.
The I appreciate that. The you moved from education into um, the venture space. What was the scariest part of that transition for you?
The fact that I knew nothing about being an investor. I mean, I it was funny when I first talked with Roland about this, and he said what he said to me, which I said earlier, like, hey, we want you to come in and do this. I was like, why? I'm not an investor. I don't know how to be an investor. I knew some about venture capital because I helped to raise the money for Build Within, right? But
Hmm.
that was limited knowledge. And what I found so fascinating was I talked really early on to Bill Hellman, who is the other founder of EO Ventures, along with Roland. And Bill is like a legend in the venture capital space, right? He was at Greylock for 35 years,
Oh
15
wow,
of those, he was the managing director, right? And I asked him, I was like, why do you want me for this job? I don't know, the venture capital world. And he looked at me and he was like, yeah, the venture capital stuff. He's like, you can learn that in a few months. He's like, this is a business about picking people, and you know how to do that. And
that's
I
so
just
awesome.
thought it was so refreshing and so unexpected that somebody who's like a titan of the venture capital world would think that like an old lady like me who had been an educate could actually learn this and be good at it. Like, just the fact that he was so open to that um, was beyond intriguing to me. And I have been so lucky because both he and Roland are so generous and gracious with their time, and helping me up the learning curve. But they're also just like, look, there's no magic to this. You got to figure out how you want to do this, what you believe. You got to make the decisions. And like, we're going to give you some thoughts and opinions along the way, but we have faith and confidence that you're going to figure it out, and you're
That's
going to make some mistakes and do all the things. And so I feel like I'm super fortunate. So all of the fears that I had, they have helped me to kind of get over the hump on those.
That's awesome. I
Yeah.
want to ask you a question from a different angle outside of the venture space. For new products trying to get into schools, what's something that you think that they should focus on? Because it is hard to get into a school. It's hard to get a pilot. It's, hard to get a contract. And um, in my opinion, the hardest part about all of that is teacher buy-in at the end of the day. You might be able to get a contract and you might all of that, but if you don't have teacher buy-in, you're still doomed. So what's something you could give for advice to an ed tech startup to get that teacher buy-in?
Um, well, first of all, I think that this is an area that I talk to a lot of folks about because I have a very specific viewpoint from which I come, right? Which is the person who everyone was trying to sell to. So I know how this goes. And it was funny because just yesterday I was talking to a friend of mine who also used to be an urban superintendent, and we were talking about the difference in selling SaaS products generally. Um, there's a difference to how you sell a SaaS product to an enterprise and how you sell a SaaS product to a school district,
Mm-hmm. Huge
because
difference.
huge difference. And so lots of SaaS sales folks are really geared towards like doing a lot of discovery, asking a lot of questions, that sort of thing. And he was saying to me, he's like, anytime I'm in a meeting and the person's spending 30 minutes asking me questions, I'm just like, I don't have time for this. He's like, I want to know now, what do you got? Is it going to solve a problem that I have or not? Like, and so, not that you don't want to be a good listener as a salesperson into education, you absolutely do. But I think the cadence is and the process is a little different. And in terms of like teacher engagement in a product, I feel like, again, everybody talks about this, but like, did you build this product trying to solve a particular and specific problem, or are you a product that is a solution that is looking for a problem, right? There's a very big
There's a
and
very
noticeable
huge
difference
difference.
during those things.
And I think a lot of products start off as the latter in that
That's
scenario.
right. But, when you go through sales motions, like you can tell when you're onto something, because when you're onto something good that's solving a real problem, uh, it's like 10 minutes into the sales, you're seeing like a lot of nodding heads, right? And people are like, yes, yes, yes. The when you're having to convince somebody that, like, yeah, it's worth your time to put into this, that's when you're probably a little off in terms of the product market fit.
No, I agree with that. I like to end with the same question on every show podcast that we do. How important has your network been in building your career, and what's some advice you'd give to a young person coming on out of school to build a network while they're still young?
I mean, in my one of my sort of guiding philosophies in life is like talent and people are everything. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, it doesn't matter what you're doing. It's about the people that you have around you. And there's no way that I could have gone from one experience and position in my life and my career to another without the support of like a super strong network and being able to call on folks. Like when I went to DCPS, and I had never obviously led a school district before, and I just like we put out the all call to everybody that we knew, like, come on board, help us take this on. And just the number of people that were like, yes, dropped everything, moved across the country to do that was unbelievable. And without that talent, we couldn't have done what we did. And even now in this space, when I have questions, like I'm hitting my network up all the time, like, hey, can you talk to these folks? Tell me what you think. Is this any good? Is this the right price point? And people are just so willing to, yeah, help. And so I would say, like, network, people, it's everything. And so build, cultivate that group, and foster those relationships really mindfully, because they will make or break you in the end.
Well, I can't agree more with you. If somebody wanted to reach out, that ain't questions, they want to give you a pitch, how do they reach out to you?
It is easy, Michelle at eoventures.com. And people, are all the time just sort of hitting me cold, and I don't mind that. So I encourage folks, especially founders, early stage founders, to contact us. We're super excited about working with folks.
Before I let you go, what's the best cold pitch you ever got in an email?
It's the best cold pitch I ever got in an email. That's a good question. I think honestly, like, I'm not one to like be swayed by like the typical sort of salesy kind of stuff, right? I can tell when somebody is being genuine, and I feel like I can smell that out. So when I feel like a founder is reaching out like in a genuine way to be like, hey, I really do think that you'd be interested in this, and this is why, and I'd love your opinion on it. That those are the ones that always resonate with me.
I appreciate it so much, Michelle. This has been a world of information, and I'm sure my audience is going to appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to staying in touch with you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Kyle.